you always hear about protecting children, protecting children. That's a big thing. We could all agree. We want to protect children, especially as a parent. I want to protect my children. But sometimes one of the things that gets forgotten about is part of those protecting the children involves their parents, which happens to be us who are trans women, who happen to be a big headline in the news that, we're some evil, nasty thing, when in reality, the problem is in these situations, and this is not true for all men, but the people that people are discussing there are predatory and abusive men. That's the real problem that's going on in the world.
Statistically, like trans women are like more likely to be the victims of violence than the people who commit the violence. It's like
Yeah,
I think
and
that's something that they kind of like don't like to showcase because that would like negate their whole like scare tactic.
welcome to our podcast. My name is Taylor. I'm joined with my best friend and co-host.
Krista Morris, welcome to our podcast, Parental Advisory.
And this is our first episode. It is our pilot, a little bit of a test run, and a little way for people to get to know us and what we're hoping to achieve throughout the podcast.
So what's our first topic of the day? Like what's our mission for this podcast?
I think the mission of this first episode is for people to get to know who we are, especially how me and you, how we became friends over the past couple years, and how it has turned into wanting to create a podcast together, and what we're hoping to achieve by doing that. And I think it's just a great little way for people to get to know who we are. So,
Yeah.
do you want to tell people a little bit about what we're hoping to achieve?
Well, I think we kind of came up with a more of a namesake type thing since we're trans parental advisory. We're going to hit on all those topics. We're going to talk about our trans experience a little bit. We're going to talk about our parental experience a little bit. And then if we've got any advice and little, sage words of wisdom, I don't know.
And, eventually we'll be inviting, guests on who have experience in areas that we don't have and be able to offer that to other people. And it's just one of those things. It's not exclusive to trans individuals. It's not exclusive to, people that are parents. It's open to everybody to come here and hopefully learn and better understand who we are and who trans individuals are, especially as a whole, because you do hear a lot about the trans community. And yeah, we're just a little bit of a fraction, but it seems to be, especially for me and you, and I think that's kind of how this came about, was we didn't really have anybody speaking for us because everybody talks about, oh, protect the children, protect the children. But what about our children? And I think that's one of those great little areas for us to hit on and actually get to talk about. And I think that's a good little how we're going to hopefully just communicate with people, change hearts, change minds, and see where things go from there.
Like, I know for me, looking at other podcasts during the beginning of my transition, I was looking for things that I could resonate with and things that, made me like see myself in those podcasts and be like, yeah, I've had those experiences starting out. And, they were difficult to find. And like the episodes that I kind of would find would be few and far between. And that's kind of what sparked the idea of like, let's make our own podcast, something that people can relate with and, resonate with and see themselves and stuff like that. So, whether you're just starting out your transition, whether you've been transitioning for a while, whether you have parent or children, whether your parents are trans, I don't know. We're gonna cover as many of those faces as we can and try to make as many people feel as included as
Yeah. So you talk about relatability. So especially when it comes to the trans experience and who people are. And obviously, we're not doctors. We're not here to offer, medical advice from us. Like we will talk about the things that we've learned along the way. And also, we don't speak for everybody, but we do come from like our own personal areas. And there's one little common area that I feel like everyone, especially if you're trans, can relate to. And I think anyone who knows someone who comes out as trans can relate to. And I think let's just dial back real quick and hopefully let people understand a little bit. But let's talk about choosing your name. So I'm just curious, when it comes to that, how did you come up with the name Krista? It's something not everybody talks about or you often hear too much about. So I'm just curious.
It was definitely one of those things I struggled with. Starting out transition, I was aware I needed a, feminine name, but it wasn't one that I like knew. I didn't know, like, I didn't have one thing that fit. Like, was I gonna choose something completely different than my original name? Am I gonna choose something close to help other people? I like my original name was along the lines of Chris, so I had to like kind of I was like, okay, let me just try to keep my initials the same at least, and maybe keep the first part like Chris the same. That way, if people shorten my name to Chris, it's gonna be like,
Hmm.
well, you're just shortening Krista. But I was like going through all the Krista names, like you know, Krista actually, Krista was the last one I settled on, and that was kind of like a suggestion of my wife's. But,
Okay.
like, Christina, Kristen, Crystal, all those kind of names, but, yeah, none of them really, like, felt right until I kind of came across Krista, and I was like, "Yeah, it's not one you hear all the time, so it kinda
Yeah.
works."
So I'm just wondering though, just because you had mentioned like what your former name was, how do you feel when people do actually shorten or abbreviate, like I guess not really abbreviate, but shorten you and call you by your former name?
Well, it depends on the person, like, if it's, like, my mom or something, like, that was kind of the intention of me choosing something similar to my old name, because I knew she wasn't gonna be able to, like, adapt kind of in that way, like, she's really supportive and, like, wants to be part of my life, but she still genders me like crazy, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, but, she tries. So that was kind of like the main
Hmm.
part of me choosing a name similar, but if it's, like, other people and I can tell they're just not comfortable with, like, calling me Krista, that's a little irritating.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that is. I have a completely different take on how my name went about though, because it is completely different than my old name. Like it I wish I did have something, but there was just nothing. But I knew for me when I came to figure out my name, I knew one of those things was I wanted something that was abbreviated the same. Abbreviated. I said that again. The initials are the same. So I just wanted to keep, TJC just it's not like I really use them, but I think it's also because there's a lot of like during the holiday season, like Christmas for us, a lot of those ornaments might have like initials and things like that. And I'm like, look, we can keep everything the same for that part. So there's like a lot of that extra side thought that went into it. But then also for me, one of those things when it came to figuring out, okay, so how do I go from this name to that name that works? I ended up just going through all the different teas and I'm like, I can't find anything that just feels like me. And that was the biggest thing, like wanting to find something that felt like me. Like way back when I had a name that I used to think I would keep, but then all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. It didn't feel like it would fit in anywhere in like my current life. And it was just
I
something
don't
you
want to
moved
be
on
around
from.
in society.
Well, and that's the thing. I wanted something like when I'm in a doctor's office, when they called my name, especially early in like transition, I wanted to hear something that didn't, get people to really turn their heads and be like, whose name is that? Because that's a very unique name and it's different and you don't hear it all the time.
It would have been
So,
great, but, the name you picked, I think, fits you really well. At least I've
and
come to know you best that way.
And that's like the cool thing because a lot of people have now come to learn, my name is Taylor, but everyone calls me a lot of the times especially if they meet me outside or like have known me through like the social media like verse is Taylor Jade. And it worked and it was comfortable for me. But it was also a name that I wanted to match with what my wife would call me before because she would sit there and, she would call me this name you shouldn't like necessarily say anymore, But the way that like flowed off her tongue, I said, look, I always knew for me and that, and this is my experiences and what felt comfortable for me was no, I want when she's trying to get my attention, when she's dropping a first and middle name, it's like she means business. And now when I hear her, it just so casually rolls off my wife's tongue and just like Taylor Jade. And yeah. And that's when I knew I chose the right name.
You know, I feel like I've read books and stuff, like fantasy stuff, where they've got like people have like a true name. And if you
Hmm.
say that, if you find out the true name of somebody, you have power over them kind of thing. And it's like you found your true name.
I would say so. It definitely feels that way. But it does come with, especially in the early stages, it is hard to introduce somebody to that name, especially for the first time. And just, all right, hey, this is what I'm gonna go by now. But I think as long as people are trying, I think that's usually what matters. And then the people who do just go with it's like perfect. But it's made me question though a lot of the times because you do see people who get married and they change their last name, and all of a sudden people just adjusted right away. And I'm like, why isn't it that easy for a first name?
Well, I don't think people are going around like calling people by their last name that often. That's maybe one thing, but also like, you know, there's a different kind of stigma about people changing their first name, especially trans people changing their first name.
To switch gears a little bit though, speaking of names, how would you say or describe coming up with the name Transparental Advisory?
It was a process. I don't think I can take all the credit myself because I think you did most of the work. We were stumbling across other names though, but Transparental Advisory did feel like one that fit well.
Yes. I would say it matched as I was sitting there. So, what Chris is referring to here is we had another name we were thinking of. And I just one night said, I think this fits us. And just, I don't know how it came about. I don't know if I was looking at like a CD cover or something, but I just said, what about transparental? It could just be a big play on words. And it just seemed like it fit. Now, the other names, though, they worked. And that's part of the figuring out a name. And one of those other names before was the other side. And that was in reference to the fact that I'm over on the East Coast and Krista is over on the West Coast.
Could also mean like we're on the other side of transition and the other side of parenting. I don't know. There's a lot of little like play on words you could do with it, but yeah.
Well, I think initially when we first discussed that, though, it was the other side because we were trying to figure out how to offer something for those starting their transition, but for those who also, because you also always hear people, especially those who are further along in their transition, when is it over? Is sometimes one of the bigger questions or thoughts that I hear. And a lot of the times people are always saying it doesn't end, or if they opted in for surgeries, it ends after they did such and such last surgery. But I think truthfully, like transition, it never really ends, but it does at one point get to a time where you say, all right, I'm on the other side of things. The hard stuff is over. The challenging stuff is over. I'm here and I'm living. I made it to the other side. And if people are thinking, hey, let's go back to the other name and do the other side, let me know. Leave a comment in the suggestion box and we'll think about it.
I don't
But
know. I think TPA just kind of like works a little better than the other side. The other side just kind of feels like also like you're othering somebody. You're like,
okay,
okay, it's those people over there on the
yeah.
other side.
It's when you're sitting there and you're going through like a checklist of things and I'm trying to think like when you're filling out something, I can't think off the top of my head. But you get down to that final box and it's just other. I guess like a poll or something. It's like, how do you feel about these criterias? And then when the one item you don't see isn't there, it's like checked other. So yeah, I could see that.
How did you find us? Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, this.
It's a very open-ended area. So it is nice to home in on something that feels natural, that feels like us. Because here we are, we're two best friends, and we have this commonality to us. Is that the right word? I don't know. The great thing about this is people are going to learn. We're not used to doing this too much, like in a public setting.
We're not
And
wordsmiths.
no, we're going to make up words as we go. So buckle up. But, you know, we became two best friends and then we said, hey, like, what can we do? Because we have like a common goal at the end of what it is to advocate. And we have different ways of how we get there. But at the end of the day, we have the same objective. And right now is a time where I feel like a lot of individuals are kind of nervous to be out there, but we decided, hey, like let's put ourselves out there and just, show up, be authentic, be ourselves. And hopefully people are just going to see, two friends getting along, having some conversations about things. Will we always agree on some stuff? Probably. Will we disagree on some things?
Are we gonna
Very
do
little.
some spicy stuff that we disagree on?
Spicy stuff. Are we going to do spicy content?
I don't know. Well, I think stuff that we disagree on is probably gonna be spicy because
Yeah.
there'll be a little bit more back and forth and be like, "No, I think you're wrong this way. It should be this way, not this way."
That's probably about as spicy as it's going to get with us on this channel. So if that's what you are looking for, yeah, thanks for the subscribe but yeah, have a great rest of your day.
You know what we should do? We
What's that?
should get, like, Zoe to be like do the thing she does, be like, "Subscribe," or what's the thing that she sees a lot on her, like, pod Eric does?
How
Like,
she sits there
comment,
and goes, like,
subscribe or
comment,
something.
and subscribe.
Yeah, we can have a little sound clip of that and be like, at the end.
That might be how we close out the podcast. We might just have one of our kids on there saying, "Hey, like this channel, subscribe." Ta-da. But I think ultimately, when it comes to the who we are, for me, and I think it's agreed upon with you, is if our children are ever to come across this podcast, we want something that they would be able to listen. So, despite the name being Parental Advisory and that seeming as though it's like more of a warning, it's just more of a play on words and more, I would say, probably grab some attention. But ultimately, we're going to aim to keep this fairly PG. Will we say some things that, you know, might need to have some sort of rating to it? Maybe we'll create a rating system. And just so people know, when you chime in, this one we will be talking more about the mature side of things, or it's just, this is perfect for anybody.
What about our D of the week? Is that what we have to
All right.
call it if we're gonna keep it PG?
Yeah, that's one we're going to introduce, I definitely think, to people later. We'll fine tune that, but stay tuned for about episode 3 when we introduce one of our, what I would arguably say is my favorite segment to come out. So stay tuned for that one. But
Yeah,
I feel like we're getting off topic from where we were heading if we keep going down that little rabbit hole. So let's like
that
bring
happens.
it back a little bit.
Alright,
So
back to naming or back to
I think we were just kind of talking about
who
how
we
we
are?
became friends
Okay.
and how that has led to where we are today, which, started way back when with a DM on Instagram from you talking about how you were, I guess you're just sitting there one night. I guess it'd be more like on your phone. You're just on your phone and, doom scrolling, and you just came across my page and you
Yeah,
said, hey,
this was before you were influencer status.
no, I'm not. I retract that. I am just an advocate.
Okay.
Okay, go
Anyway,
on.
so yeah, I noticed it was a picture of you and your kids and Ashley at Disneyland. And
Hmm.
I was like, "This person has a lot of things in common with me. Let me just follow them." And then I started seeing you on lives, and I was like, "I'm gonna DM them, tell them that I may have been lurking for a little while and have noticed them, and if they wanna chat, hit me up." And then I kinda started joining lives, and then I got her number because she's easy that way. Just kidding. And then
Don't
we just
tell
started
anybody.
she's like, I have a job that I just drive around all day. If you wanna call me, go ahead." And we talk, like, every day. So that's kind of how it started.
And that's pretty much how we got to where we are today, which was then eventually not, it was almost about 2 years ago at this point where you had no, not 2 years. 2 years seems way too long. It was a year ago. You had messaged me and we were texting each other about, hey, like, let's create a podcast. And I don't know if I necessarily like bid onto it right away, but then I think I started to sleep on it more and more and more. And then as
Well,
I started seeing,
I think at
what's
the
that?
time you had your hands full with other things, but you would eventually, or you would like pretty like immediately was like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't know when I'm gonna have time for this because I'm doing this and this and this. And
Yeah,
now those responsibilities have kind of waned a little bit. We're like, let's do it.
yeah, I would say that definitely did. And then there might have been some things I didn't always agree with on how things were being done, or maybe just bumped heads with people the wrong way. But because for me, one of those biggest things was advocating for trans individuals, especially for those that are like my family or in my particular situation, especially. Like, I'm very strong on the advocacy that goes into what, and I always say, hey, this is like what trans looks like, especially for me. But it was also a way I've come to learn is a great way to advocate for other people, especially in the work environment that I'm in, the people I interact with, and just how I would say I go about life in general. And I just felt at that time I needed to step away from the other areas I was involved with. And I think that's maybe what freed up the time. And then by the time I was ready to do things, it just seemed like you got busy with life for a moment and we just had some time to catch up. And then I think our biggest struggle that we will be running into as we start to roll out the future episodes from now will just be schedules, because I do work a job that doesn't necessarily have end hours. You work a job that's later. And one of the hardest things is just, especially juggling our families and schedules around things, is just when to sit down and record these things.
Yeah. Like your schedule is kind of workaroundable because you've got a set schedule. Me, on the other hand, I have no idea when my days off are going to be usually
Yeah.
a week before. So makes things a little more challenging.
And it's really just we're figuring it out and just squeezing things into it. And now, what a lot of people don't realize as this pilot episode is rolled out is, yeah, we did have a few episodes recorded. And then Chris had said, hey, this is what I'm thinking of how the podcasts are going to come out. And I said, wait a minute, let's rewind a little bit to things that we've already recorded and re-record those things, because the way Chris was discussing it, I felt like laid out a great the framework for how our podcast will be structured over the next couple of episodes, which is, getting people to know a little bit about us, but hitting on the TPA aspect, which is, trans, the parental, and then the advisory part, as Krista had mentioned earlier. And I realized we didn't necessarily do that at the beginning. And having a podcast that we are going to be rolling out, I want it to be something we're both proud of, and then something that our audience will be happy to listen to. And I felt like we can revisit those things. And here we are, revisiting it.
Yeah. So we'll probably touch a little bit on, you know, the trans aspect of things, like I mentioned. And that could be in terms of stories, of like past experiences. But we're always going to kind of, I think, try to tie it into the parental aspect too. And then the advisory part. So it'll kind of be like a step by step process. Is that kind of what you were figuring or kind of imagining?
Yeah, it's kind of how I was imagining it, just because I, as we discussed the old podcast, we've stepped over to the other side of things where it's not as much of the struggle. And when it comes to a lot of the times, if you are here and especially later into like a transition, you've already heard the stories. So many of us have the same stories. And I wanted to be able to present something that, you will hear about our transition, not by just hearing, okay, I came out now, I did this, and now I'm here. And
We didn't want to do the generic timeline story.
yeah, I want to meet people with where they're at right now. And as Chris had mentioned, is the relatable side of things. And that just seems to be the approach that's going to work best for us. And so I would imagine the next few episodes, what that would be looking like as outside of this is we're going to get better at this. So if you are one of our day ones, appreciate you. And we hope you stick around. And give us some time to learn this. And, leave comments and suggestions, engage with us so we can figure out how to improve and what you're liking, what you're not liking.
What you'd like to see in the podcast.
Over the next few, we're going to talk a little bit more. We had mentioned, we're both parents. I've got my family over here on the East Coast. Chris has got her family on the West Coast. We have different life experiences and how we handled our transitioning, especially when it comes to our family. So, are we going to get more of an episode following up pretty soon with, hearing Chris's side and then eventually hearing my side of things on how things went for me when it came to coming out? And I think also coming out later in life, we'll be talking about so much. And then hopefully getting some familiar faces to us, maybe to say yes to coming onto the podcast. Fingers crossed for our spouses or my mom or whoever. But
Like, I wonder if we can get any, like, do you know any like trans youth? I'd like to hear their side of the story too.
I do not know any trans youth that could come on. I would imagine we would also need to have some form of a waiver thing for them to go
Yeah,
on, especially.
it would like, I was just wondering if you knew anyone. But yeah.
That's another great though. I that's, I'm glad you brought that up now. But as we're talking about the things that people will be able to hear about though, yeah, we might have come out later in life. I came out at 32, and that's when I finally came out, oh, hey, I'm trans. But sometimes the thing people forget, we knew a lot of this stuff way back when. So at one time, we were a, a trans youth. We just didn't necessarily have the words or the language, the community, the support as what there is today. So when we do vouch or speak on or defend something that's reflective of trans youth, it's just because we were that at one time.
And we don't want to erase them.
Yeah. It's just we can speak on that and what our experiences are, and that's something also to even talk about with some people, and we'll eventually figure those little things out. But get it right now, sports is a big topic. Getting someone who knows a little bit about sports, someone who knows a little bit more about HRT or the surgeries or just even our personal experiences, our allies. I've gotten a lot of questions coming in as I had put out a little email asking for some suggestions, what people would like to see. And some of those have revolved around other parents that are trans in regards to their children growing up. Someone was talking about having a 1.5-year-old and being nervous about the type of school district that they're going to have their kids in. Some people have children that are much older and that were harder to, accept things. So it's going to be interesting, though, to invite people, especially in those situations, because for me and Krista, we both have children that are young age. I would say what mine is 6 and 3. I was drawing a blank, 6 and 1 for you. So we have younger children. We don't necessarily have that experience yet, but some of the questions and concerns that other people have asked about, being in school, I'm going to learn that with my children. I just had a field trip recently with my daughter and I was nervous. That was my first time. I didn't know what to do. I'm just trying to go and enjoy a field trip with my daughter, just like any other parent would be that's chaperoning. But it still brought questions just because there is, unfortunately, a culture/media politic war going on with who we are.
Luckily, I don't know. The area I live in is a little bit more on the tolerant side, but also like a little bit conservative in this like little like area. But I think overall, the overall vibe in where I live is tolerance and like acceptance and stuff. So, going to like pick up my son from school, I don't really get the looks that I was imagining I might have gotten like 4 years ago when I first started. But yeah, it's definitely like one of those things that you're not sure about until like you're in those situations and experiencing it.
It's one of those, I would say, what I've come to learn is there's so much more that's actually going on in your own head than what's actually going on in real life. But as you mentioned though, like where you're at what, 4 years ago to now, so much changes in that time. And so it just gets easier over time. And that's one of the bigger things. Like, hey, it might feel difficult or hard right now, but it's going to get easier. It just keeps getting that way. And even for me, I'm more in that, what would I guess it'd be a purplish type of area in terms of the climate of some people. But at the end of the day, so many people, they don't really care that they have really no issue with someone who's trans. They might have certain beliefs or feelings on certain topics, but it doesn't mean that they are fully against, is what I've come to learn. And yeah, so it's one of those interesting things that we'll just have to talk about and get into. And I was just even sitting here now thinking, like, we enjoy traveling and hanging out and going to new places when we get the chance to hang out together in person. What would it be like for us to have, a wheel with like the 50 states or whatever, and just find people in all those different states and just bring them on and talk to them until we cover the entire that's an idea. Something to think about. I'm just
Have a whole episode where we go and just like ask a trans person a question.
That would actually be a great idea. I'm just sitting here, nobody steal my idea because I will be so mad. But getting a question from one person in each of the 50 states and putting it into like a big like collage. I think we should do that, maybe.
Sounds like it could be a good way to showcase how many of us there are and where our diversity lies.
Yeah, and just like who we are as individuals, which I think is the big thing.
'Cause even if a state bans you and doesn't appreciate you, you're still going to be there. You're still valid.
Yeah, we've got I got thoughts on that, what you were just talking about. I've got some thoughts. Tune into our future episodes where we'll be able to talk about these thoughts. But going back to the podcast, we're kind of just trying to hit on the who, what, why, where.
Who,
Can
what,
you
when,
discuss
where.
what's that?
I said who, what, when, where, why.
In terms of podcasts, you listen to podcast way more than me,
On occasion.
occasion. So I'm just curious, like, what type of podcasts have you listened to, and like, what do you think is going to set it a little bit different than ours?
I feel like I listen to mostly like interview based podcasts these days. But, in the beginning of the transition, it was kind of like still interview based, but it was more like like you had a host that was interviewing another trans person for something, whatever reason, to either find out their story or like, you know, that kind of thing. I've also listened to kind of like advice type podcast with like a trans person. So they like would discuss, whatever topic they happen to land on that day and stuff and go over little things. I've listened to like, what's it called? Pop culture type of like podcasts who have trans people in it and stuff. And they talk about the like roles that trans people have in pop culture. Those are kind of interesting. So yeah, I've kind of listened to all over. Right now I'm kind of in this like political like thing.
Okay. For me, I hardly ever listen to podcasts. I do try when Krista sends me something. I do try my best to listen to that. But for me right now, I've been listening to podcasts similar to Not Gonna Lie with Kylie Kelsey. That seems to be the one thing that I keep going to.
Lifestyle type of podcast, or is it like a what does she talk about?
I would say it's more pop culture. I guess would you and anybody who happens to watch it that's watching this or listening, if that is more pop culture, let me know. But I think it's more when I think about it, she's talking with other moms. She's talking about empowering women who empower other women. Then she has a lot of interviews and just kind of like she'll do what like kind of like go through like TikToks that might be like popular, just little tiny things like that, which brings me to one of the areas that I started to think about as we were creating this podcast, especially Kylie, who's bringing on a lot of moms to discuss things, is I would love to invite other parents that are trans onto the podcast so we can talk to them. But I don't want it to exclusively just be for someone who's trans and is a parent. I wanted to open it to really anybody who wants to come on here, but just have those conversations and just hang out and, just show people who we are. And I think that's kind of what Kylie gets into on her podcast and with that, because I don't know. I've always liked that one. And it does add a little bit of the influence to how I would like some things to go here, but I don't need it to. It's definitely not. Yeah, we'll never be able to compete with that one, but that's a good one if you've never listened to it.
The good thing about, like, the podcast world is you don't really have to compete, you just kinda have to throw it out there, and people will find time to listen to it, I think. So we talked about the trans part. Did we cover much of the parental part? Just wanting to talk about talk to other people with parent or with children, or do we wanna kind of, like we kinda talked about our, like, fears about kids going to school and stuff like that. What other kind of, like, concerns would you, like, wanna bring up in this about your children?
I think it's just really for me, it's about creating a world and this is something I have said numerous times in different areas. I just, when I do these things and I say things, I'm not an influencer. I repeat, I, but I do have my niche little following here.
Not an influencer until you are.
But I've come to learn when it comes to advocating, especially for families similar to mine, especially being a parent and a spouse. One of those things, though, for me is really big are my children. And this does not mean, and I just want to put it out there so nobody's coming into the comment being like, oh, you're grooming your kids or whatever. Like, get that nonsense out of here. For me, what it's about is creating a world for my children to grow up to be whoever and whatever they want to be without the fear of judgment and knowing that they will always be unconditionally loved. And the other big thing with that I don't always say, or I sometimes forget to just like add to something I've written, is knowing that my children are going to always love your children. And that's kind of been my biggest goal with this is I'm looking at the next generation that's going to come. I'm looking at the person who might be sitting next to me when I decide to, hop on a plane or whatever. Like I'm doing it for them. I'm not really doing this necessarily for me. I'm doing it for you. And that's kind of what I would want to say about the direction of how I would want this to be shaped up. It's just getting that message out there of, hey, this is, as I always put like a hashtag out, that always is, this is what trans looks like, because it looks different for everybody. And in those instances, it's what it looks like for me. But I just want to talk about and highlight the good because I do know there's so much good out in the world. And I know trans individuals were not this big bad monster that we seem to be getting painted as. I know we're told we're 1% of the population. And with that, though, means not everybody knows everything about us. But if we could just show up in places where we're not being seen, especially in the podcast setting, especially coming to people as families, as neighbors, as coworkers, it goes and it highlights who we are. So I think that's what I would want to add. Is there anything that you would maybe want to touch more on?
Probably just touching on what you did or what you said was that we're just here to like kind of show that we're gonna love our children regardless of how things how we are, how the world is gonna treat them, and how they're gonna grow up. They can decide to do whatever they want and we're gonna support it. And I think having that level of like kind of awareness and, maybe nuance that can resonate with others and stuff and show that we are, you know, just as loving and caring as them when it comes to like being a parent.
Yeah, because one of those things, and this is maybe how I would want to start to like close out the little pilot episode, is one of those things when it comes to, as I mentioned earlier in the start of this pilot, is you always hear about protecting children. That's a big thing. We could all agree we want to protect children, especially as a parent. I want to protect my children. But sometimes one of the things that gets forgotten about is part of those protecting the children involves their parents, which happens to be us who are trans women, who happen to be a big headline in the news that, we're some evil, nasty thing, when in reality, the problem is in these situations, and this is not true for all men, but the people that people are discussing there are predatory and abusive men. That's the real problem that's going on in the world. Because as I hear the argument about protecting children, I just can't help but think, and fast forward when my children become a little more privy to the situation that our family is different than others, is in some of these situations where they want to, protect children. My child, I can't help but think, is going to have a situation where she's going to think, well, what about protecting my parent? How do we do that?
Statistically, like, trans women are, like, more likely to be the victims of, like, violence than
Hmm.
the people who commit the violence. It's like, I
Yeah.
think that's something that they kind of, like, don't like to showcase because that would, like, negate their whole, like, scare tactic, but we're not the ones out there, like, hurting people. That would be, like, probably cis men.
Yeah.
There's a reason that, like, women choose the bear in that, like, would you rather be stuck in a woods with a bear or a man thing?
And I think that's kind of what we want to hit on, is we want to talk about the humanizing aspect of what it really means for someone to be trans, and just kind of answer some of the questions that I asked myself. How the hell did I get here? How do we move forward? Because when this all started, I had no idea it was going to be like this, but here I am. I believe everything happens for the right reason and at the perfect time. And me coming out later in life, I think was just all about perfect timing. And here we are, and we're going to make a difference. And I look forward to doing a podcast with you. I think this is going to be a great little way to grow our friendship even more. And I'm excited about that. So,
Grow and test and strain, all those little fun things that, ultimately will help us grow.
for sure. Do you want to tell people about when they could hopefully expect our podcast? That is subject to change.
We're gonna try to release every other Monday, I think is still the plan. This episode, we'll see when it drops, and then you can probably start expecting, hopefully, them pretty consistently after this.
Yeah. I would be thinking people will be able to find us over on Spotify, Apple, and pretty much wherever else we could get the podcast pushed to. One of the areas for people to keep up to date with us, especially as we are navigating this rollout of the podcast, will be following us on places like our Instagram, which is Parental Advisory. Yeah, and just keep up to date with us and follow if you have us subscribed anywhere, especially right now, is just keep up to date on the description where we'll probably post any changes to our scheduling with how things are. I'm hoping that this podcast rolls out when me and Krista are hanging out in person in a couple weeks. And after that, maybe we'll get another episode recorded. Who knows? But until then, I think people should go follow my best friend over at her Instagram, which is, what's your Instagram handle?
It's Krista_Morris_83.
And people could follow me on Instagram at __ Taylor.jade. But most of all, go follow us on Transparental Advisory and just interact with us. We want to interact back with you, and we want to grow and create something for everyone. This isn't just limited to trans individuals. It's not limited to trans parents. This is open for anybody who just simply wants to learn what it means to be trans and actually hear from trans individuals themselves.
A topic that probably doesn't get touched on up that much.
And that's what we're here to do. So thank you for anyone who has chimed in and listened to us this entire time. And I promise we're going to get better at this and more comfortable.
Yep, it's all it's a work in progress, and we're happy to put this out to the world and let you all get a glimpse of our little world. I don't know. I was gonna say the other side of us, but that would touch in on the old name.
Thank you, everyone. This is Transparental Advisory. My name is Taylor, and this was my co host and best friend.
I'm Krista Morris, and we'll see you next time.